You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Do you guys know what the Casablanca test is? The Casablanca test is essentially when you define something by saying, I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. So, like, when you see a hot member of the gender you're attracted to, you might not be able to say why you think they're hot, but you know it when you see it. The most famous definition, or the most famous use of the Casablanca test was Justice Stewart in the first ever case that the U.S. Supreme Court heard on obscenity and pornography. And Stewart said, I'll know it when I see it. And it's because the case was called Casablanca versus the Navy. And that's where the term came from. So this idea of knowing it when you see it is a very broad definition of very loose terms that everybody's definition of is different, which is kind of a problem when you're talking about the law, right? You don't ever want to judge using the Casablanca test to be like, well, you didn't really break the law, but it kind of looks like you did, so you did. That's not a good thing. And when this is most often used is in cases of censorship. And the thing about censorship is that it's an interesting concept, too, to define legally. Right? Because it's very easy to say, oh, I got censored, and you didn't actually get censored. People just didn't want to hear what you had to say, which has been something that has been the case my entire life. Hell, I was telling somebody earlier that we needed more salsa for our tacos, and that was not received well. Apparently, if you tell someone they've underseasoned the taco meat, they get angry at you. But censorship is the suppression of words, images, or ideas that are offensive. Well, what's offensive? I don't know. I'll know it when I see it. This show is super offensive. It's the Devil's Advocates. That's right, everybody. I ate bland tacos for dinner.
I wish I ate bland tacos for dinner. It probably would have been treating my stomach better.
Well, no, it wouldn't have. What's up, everybody? Welcome into Devil's Advocates. I am producer Kyle, and that is Bronze Age Nerd. And this is Devil's Advocates. Our topic tonight, as you saw in the thumbnail, is actually a part 2. This is a topic we've already discussed once, but new developments have happened.
We're back again.
Yes, this is the war on adult comics. The first time we talked about it, I don't even remember what the context was.
Yeah, I think it was more general. One thing that we'll probably touch on tonight that we definitely mentioned during that show that I remember is certain venues not being willing to sell adult comics.
Yeah.
So that's going to come into play for sure as we talk about things tonight. But I think it was kind of more in general because it was just something I was noticing. Like I know some friends that sell a lot of adult comic books, and they were being taken off of like eBay listings and things like that. And it kind of reminded me, that is kind of a niche in the comic book collecting market that does have a lot of restrictions placed upon it.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I kind of remember now us talking about more specifically kind of the idea of what is the role of adult comics in the industry. And, that's kind of in our outline for tonight's show in a little bit of a different way. So, Bronze, do you want to kind of set up how what we're here to talk about, why we kind of came to this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as usual on the show, we're going to talk more about the broad strokes of the issue. Pardon my pun. When when it comes to this kind of thing, more than like naming names, talking about specific things, unless it becomes specifically relevant. So, here's what I'll say. And shout out to our producer Jay for reminding us that this is going on, because this is something I did hear about, but I got some more information from him and I really appreciated that. So there's essentially why we're here tonight is because there was a Kickstarter that was taken down from Kickstarter's platform for having adult material, for being not safe for work, for better words.
After it funded,
and to add a little more nuance to that, due to the fact that the payment processor, in this case, it was a company called Stripe, you may have heard of them, was not, it's part of their terms of service, as far as I'm aware, that they're not allowed to sell adult material. Probably, I'm guessing that there's probably some age gate related reasons there. If you're kind of wondering why that would be the case, a lot of times it has to do with making sure that it's not possible for minors to purchase things on the site. At least that's ostensibly part of the reason why things like this happen. So we have a Kickstarter that was taken down for adult themed material. Now, again, after it funded, which we'll definitely talk about that, just to frame that conversation, keep in mind, if you're not familiar with the indie scene on Kickstarter, even the not so indie scene on Kickstarter, really, in some ways, there are a lot of not safe for work comic books that go through Kickstarter. And there have been kind of rumblings that we're going to be seeing a crackdown on those types of content. And this could just be the first wave of that. If it's not the first wave of that, though, it does make you wonder about why was this one campaign singled out versus all the other ones? What is the future possibility? Are there other payment processing options that could be used? Those kinds of questions are kind of what get opened up by all this. But that's basically the main impetus for why we're talking about this again.
Yeah. So my understanding of the story, and it's kind of what Bron said, but that Stripe, which is a national, or is a not even national, it is a global credit card processing company, which works on the back end of a lot of web-based platforms. So, for instance, the EXP website, if you make a purchase from the EXP website, if you choose certain payment options, it's processed through Stripe. We don't use it very much, but it's an option. They are bound by the laws of the areas in which they operate.
Yeah.
And as such, they are having to sort of conform to what some would consider a regressive set of laws. In other people's eyes, and I would say on some level I'm one of them, they are operating in a safe business manner, which is to say, conforming to regressive laws, they're getting out ahead of what could be and protecting themselves and their clientele from potential litigation. Right? I think that's something we're going to have to talk about at some point on this episode. It sucks. Right? We can all agree that censorship of any form is not good. However, protecting a small comic book creator who chose to crowdfund, protecting Kickstarter, and protecting themselves from being sued by someone who thinks that this kind of thing shouldn't exist, good for everybody in the long run.
Yeah, like I'll just real quickly, like, to kind of reveal my bias a little bit. So I think because I do some things that are kind of like cheesecake aligned, I get kind of lumped in sometimes with sort of liking a lot of these comic books. That's not really the case for me. I can appreciate some of the artwork. I think some of it's really cool. I don't really buy a lot of it myself. Occasionally, if something has to be really kind of just like speak to my particular sensibilities for me to want to buy it. That said, I want to support people who want to buy this kind of content. Absolutely, especially in the comic book space. I think it's a huge historied part of comic books. I absolutely think that anybody who wants to be able to buy it, that is of legal age to be able to buy it, should be allowed to in a way that can be protective for everybody.
Mhm.
However, that's the rub. I do think that you the puns are writing themselves tonight. You do have to be careful in terms of making sure that it's okay for the person who is trying to buy that material to be able to buy it legally.
Right.
And that I think is kind of the crux of the issue for me. So I don't want people to think that we're like, hey, this kind of stuff's bad. No, I mean, whether you like it or not, I definitely don't think that's the case for. I'm sure Kyle would support people who are of age being able to purchase that if that's what they want to, right? Yeah. So
I am against censorship in any form.
yeah.
That said, I am pro protecting everyone's business. Right? So on some level, it's don't censor books, but also make sure that people aren't getting sued because of the books you're letting them sell. Right? So it's a kind of meh sort of problem. So here is the deal. Steve, we're not going to use the P word on the show. And here's why. Many of the platforms we're talking about are actually platforms we're on right now. And we don't want to get flagged for that sort of thing. So we're gonna refer to things as NSFW, not safe for work, adult, and you'll find that as we go into this, that line is much grayer than you would think.
Yeah, the Casablanca thing that Kyle mentioned in the cold open, that particular test, that is a very interesting way to look at this. I think it was a good way to frame this conversation.
Yeah. And here's what I mean. Like, just to get it out on Front Street, Meta and eBay have eBay has already banned certain companies and certain types of comics from being listed there. Meta, and I've been talking to retailers. Meta has been flagging Artgerm covers as being adult content, and you can't sell that on Meta Marketplace.
Yet another reason for us all to be mad at AI.
Right. I don't know that I've ever seen a Catwoman more covered up than Artgerm's Catwoman, but here it is flagged on Meta. So just understanding when we talk about adult content, we're talking about content that is geared towards grown-ups. Even if it is art, somebody like Artgerm, right? Not specifically companies like I saw them mentioned, Boundless, or some of these other things that people associate with this.
Well, and Jay brought up a good point too, which is that something I think people that aren't familiar with these comics sometimes have a skewed perspective on what they are. Yeah, sometimes these are perfectly normal, and I'm using that term like average, whatever you want to call it, comic books inside, but they might have like incentive covers or variant covers that are designed to appeal to that audience, or to capitalize on the popularity of some of the artists that are involved in some of the kind of not safe for work style comic book covers.
Right. And Steve, to answer the question, aren't most comic books geared towards grown-ups today? No. By and large, most comic books are geared towards a broad age of audience, right? Teenagers, young adults, grown-ups. But we're talking specifically books that are geared toward, again, grown-ups, right? Like, so just know when we say grown-ups, we mean grown-ups. Grown folk stuff.
Like problems with their knees. No.
Well, depending on what you're in, I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum here.
Yeah.
But so I want to kind of reset the question a little bit here, Bronze.
Sure.
This is the second time we're having to talk about this kind of topic. is this indicative of a problem with this segment of the industry? Does this segment of the industry tend to push the limits too far, or tend to push the boundaries of what is and isn't considered grown up too much to cause this? Or is this an overreaction or over reach by companies who in their minds are just trying to protect themselves?
It's a great question. And the short answer for me is I think it's actually both. So here's how I view this problem. I do think that there is something about the adult geared, grown up geared comic book market out there that does sort of bring some baggage with it. And you could speculate on the reasons why that is and all these kinds of different things. But I do notice that happening over and over again. Part of it is just because there's a knee-jerk reaction from a segment of collectors of, man, those books are immature, ironically enough. That's kind of part of it that's baked into it. Some companies are probably going to have that same view. You know, if you're really looking at it from a, 5 mile in the sky perspective as a suit and tie trying to protect your business, how much real leeway are you going to have for artistic interpretations? That's probably going to be very limited compared to what the artists are intending when they put out the content. So I think that is definitely something that is baked into this discussion, is there's sort of a difficulty around the topic that is going to be inherent to this type of content. But I also think that there is along with that, like a reluctance to allow for this type of art, like, because the problems I can think of that you may have with this kind of content, like, for example, a minor being able to purchase this kind of content without age verification, that is a solvable problem, at least from a legal's perspective, to where you can put in age gates or age verification. Plenty of sites do that and are able to do that in the day of the internet. So to me, one thing I'll just throw out there when it comes to a payment processor having an issue with this type of content because of a potential legal ramification, I don't understand how come, along with rolling out that sort of reaction of we're going to cancel the Kickstarter just to ensure safety or all those kinds of things. First of all, a statement on why would be very beneficial. Some clarification, maybe there were some transactions that got flagged. We don't know.
Right.
So that's possible. And so there be erring on the side of caution, that could be, but also try to roll out a solution along with it, or at least a roadmap for a solution. And I think there are lots of solutions available for this kind of problem, or express to us that you're not willing to do that. I think that's kind of something that when I think about this whole situation, it's like, either tell us that you're basically all for it and this is how you plan to achieve it and make it safe for everybody, or it's just not happening here, go somewhere else. Right. That's kind of where I kind of come back to on this one. What do you think about it?
Well, I will say this, anyone my age or about my age, so Bronze, you probably know this, and Jay, I know you do, and most of the people in the chat will, from a very young age, we knew how to get around age gating, right? I mean, anybody who grew up with the internet knew how to create an AIM account, even if you weren't technically old enough to have an AIM account, or, how to get past some of the stuff that had been put in place as response to the Columbia Record Club kind of stuff.
True.
By the way, that's not entirely true, buddy, but it is in certain places and certain items. So it's an interesting kind of conundrum. So it just turns into a level of you've got to figure out how to prevent those workarounds, right? But yes, this seems like a solvable solution, a solvable problem.
Yeah.
Personally, I think it's establishment of a secondary platform. And I'm gonna
Kickstarter After Dark.
Well, kind of, right. I think the reality is that in this, there are record companies who have done this.
Yeah.
Where if you want to get the radio edits of songs on Spotify, you can get them, right? Or on Apple Music. But if you want to get the original with the, a parental advisory sticker on them versions of the lyrics, you can stream them for free from these record companies' websites, right? Like creation of hey, over here. So Kickstarter, you want to, or crowdfunding, I don't want to say Kickstarter specifically, but crowdfunding altogether. Here's Kickstarter. Over here is, Kickstarter 2, where it's,
it's only for the fans of Kickstarters,
Well, but no, it's yeah.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
But it's it's a Kickstarter run and operated platform that is specifically for that, right? Where it does have things like credit card verification, so you can't pay with PayPal. You can't pay with all, Venmo or Cash App or any of that kind of stuff. Where you have to have some sort of proof of age, right? You want to become a member, you need to upload an ID scan.
Exactly.
Things like that. Like, again, when we talk about the Experience website, when I wanted to set up the Experience website so that we can make sales, I had to scan in my ID and Nick's ID and Jen's ID as the owners of the company to prove that we were of age to own a company. Yeah. Right?
There's auction platforms where I've had to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Where, absolutely. You think Sotheby's and Heritage Auctions don't have like my birth certificate, my social security card, my firstborn's, DNA? They got all my information to prove that I am who I say I am. So there are certainly solvable options here. And we'll get to that later, but I want to more fully understand what the problem is. Right? And what's causing it. Oh God, Mr. Nope. Forget caption, man.
Yeah.
Oh. I just felt real old.
Or like, anyway. Instead of like a CAPTCHA, you could have a rotary phone simulator where dial this number and you have to like click and drag the dial.
Oh man.
Or like, you know, it's kind of like the manual transmission, like show how you would shift into second gear on this car.
Well, I know
that one might block
who couldn't do that.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, right. Doing things like that. Identify which phone Zach Morris had. You know, it's just a picture of different cell phones from different eras. There are many, many things you could do here. But the problem is that a small segment of the comic book community, and I'm going to say a small segment because really when you think about what the comic book publishing world looks like, it's a very small segment, is being over policed when others are being under policed. And it's an interesting time, right? An interesting thing to think about. So we have been talking about kind of what is the problem for a while, and we're going to keep defining this as we go, but we need to take our first break very quickly. And before we do, I want to remind everybody of a couple of things. One, if you're new to the show, like if you saw the thumbnail and clicked on the show, thanks for being here. If you're over on Instagram, thanks for being here. We appreciate y'all. If you're one of our regulars, like so many of you in the chat are, we love you guys. Thanks for being here. If you haven't hit subscribed on the EXP YouTube channel, would you do that for me? We are 2 subs away from launching new content this week. We've been working. We've been waiting. We've got new content. I have 15 episodes of this new content in the can for y'all. We've been waiting, and we're 2 away. So if you haven't hit subscribe for me. Click the bell so you know when we're live. We're live all the time. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern, myself, Jay, and Miss Jen, or Jay, who's in the background, and Miss Jen King will do rapid fire comic reviews of this week's new releases. James from Mint Hunter will be back with a live sale tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern, and Kicking It with Henri will be tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. So we will see all of that tomorrow. But in the meantime, check out these commercials. If you see something from a comic book company that you don't know about, call your LCS and be like, hey, I want to check this book out. Thanks. And we'll do that. So we'll be back in just a minute. Download our app on Google Play and the App Store. It's so simple, even my mommy can use it. In a world where you hit like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, that'd be really great. Thanks. Welcome back in, everybody. This is Devil's Advocates. I am producer Kyle. That guy is the Bronze Age nerd.
Hey.
Y'all, you see the shirt Bronze is wearing? You can buy it from him. If you ever need a corner box with a beard that's better than yours, he's got one.
Sticker stew, just saying. You know, I mean, I'm not ashamed. I'll put it out there. Thanks to Kyle for recommending the place where I'm getting these made too, by the way.
Did we ever get that hooked to your YouTube page?
Yes, it is. It is on my YouTube. So you can go directly to my YouTube page if you want to check out the store with all the designs I've put up there, and more are coming soon.
I remember I was supposed to tell you how to do that, and I forgot to tell you.
Luckily, they make it pretty easy.
Yeah. That's why we chose them, right? It's just all self-integrated. And if you head over to the Experience, if you're on the Experiences YouTube page, you should be able to find it pretty easily. But if you head over to the explive.com and click on merch, we have some limited edition drops available, including the J edition of the Fill Out Your Form shirt, which is live again because your boy needed to buy one and forgot. So I made it live again because I have that kind of power. Yeah, Mr. Nope's got a Bronze Age nerd shirt. Love it. All right.
Nice.
So we're talking about the war on adult comics, and we're talking specifically about a type of censorship that's happening to certain independent comics, but not even necessarily independent comics. We mentioned Boundless Comics earlier, who is a publishing house that isn't really independent that has had this problem. Is this this feels like it's an all of a sudden it's a problem kind of situation. Is it?
Yeah, I see that. And I know, again, I know the rhetorical tone there a little bit too, because we want the chat to chime in, but I think this is kind of a new wave of something that's been going on for a while. That's kind of my reaction to this. And it's, just the fact that we're having to talk about it again, this is part two. That's kind of part of where it comes in for me, as where I think that this is sort of just a continuation of like a crackdown almost, if you will, on what's been going on. So, one thing that kind of comes to my mind is in the first segment, we laid out a pretty good logical reason why companies could have issues with this, right? Legality, exposure to legal action, those sorts of things. When it comes to this kind of next segment, going to kind of, set a seed in people's mind. I want them to think about as we're talking about some of these kind of concepts. And that is almost kind of what spawned that first, episode title that we did for that first stream, The War on Adult Comics. Is there also a beyond legal or litigation based reason for this, which is kind of more of a moral objection? And that's where it comes into that censorship area, right? It's not just censorship by convenience or by necessity, but it could also be by desire to not see that type of content on their platform and those sorts of things, which is fair on a private platform as long as it's equally enforced and it's not enforced willy-nilly, which is what makes me worry. So yeah, that's kind of where I want to kind of plant the seed with people when they think about some of these concepts we're going to talk about in this segment here.
Right. Like here's the thing, and I want to make this super clear, right? Anyone can put whatever they want in their own library, right? When it becomes a matter of public knowledge, now it becomes more of a, where does this go, right? I don't buy a lot of this kind of books. In fact, I will tell you this. The only book that falls into this category that I own is Karma by Dan Wickline. And the only reason I own it is because my friend Dan Wickline wrote it. Right? Like, that is me backing a Kickstarter project published by Dynamite, written by someone who's been on the experience since day one.
Makes sense.
Right? It's not part of my library. What you put in your library is your business. However, this is an interesting thing. When I had my store, I didn't sell it either. If you wanted to buy it, I could tell you which store in town to go to because they had it. And I was fine with you going there and spending that money because I wanted my store to be perfectly open to anyone who walked in the door. Right. And by that, I mean, if a 5-year-old came in without a parent, I didn't want to have to explain to them what was in the box they couldn't look in.
That makes sense.
Right. That was a business decision I made. That is in no way censoring anyone. That is just exercising my freedom as a retailer and as a business owner to restrict my own trade.
Yeah.
That's me letting money walk out the door because it made my life easier. So for Kickstarter, on some level, I think it's a little bit of that, right? Like, they're willing to leave some money on the table so they don't have to deal with stuff.
Yeah. And your comment brought up two things I want to touch on. And for me, that is absolutely true. Just as I respect the ability of anybody to buy whatever they like when it comes to, comics content, anything that's legally allowable, I think for sure you should be able to be allowed to buy that and put it in your collection, enjoy it, respect it, all those kinds of things. Conversely, I respect a private business's ability to choose what to sell or what is sold on their platform. And so I respect somebody, a platform like a crowdfunding platform being able to say, hey, this kind of content is allowed and this kind of content isn't allowed.
Right.
I think that's absolutely fine. Now, again, I will kind of bring up the point, and maybe this is the first volley in what could be a long, drawn out process about removing that type of content from their platform. But when this particular platform comes up, it's only so far been the case for a couple of programs a couple of campaigns that I'm aware of. So I would want to see that be performed more across the board. Hey, let's keep everybody on the same playing field. To me, the most interesting wrinkle in that is that it was a fully funded campaign. Like it almost makes more sense if they would have done that to a campaign that wasn't fully funded, and that
or they hadn't launched yet.
Yeah, exactly. And this one, it just makes me wonder if they're almost kind of proving a point. But then again, there are much larger campaigns out there that offer not safe for work content that also could have a point there.
Here's the other thing that we're not talking about and that no one is talking about in this topic. We don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And the inner movings of the business side of a company like Kickstarter could be for the first time now dictating this action.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a for instance from my own life, and not specifically my life, but I'll get to it. The company that owned iHeartMedia in 2001 had a distinctly conservative bent. Okay. And that is to say, the privately held company that owned what was then called Clear Channel, after 9/11 banned certain songs from the air on their radio stations. That was technically a form of censorship, but because they're a privately held company, they could do that, right? It's just them curating the playlist. By the time I went to work for them, iHeartMedia was a publicly funded company, but those songs were still not in the catalog. And that is a factor of the inner workings of the business, right?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with what anyone's beliefs were, because those beliefs had changed. But it has to do with the inner workings of the business. So we don't know, is there a private equity group investing in Kickstarter that is saying, look, we're willing to give you $1 billion to expand your operations, but you can't have this stuff on your platform anymore? Or, hey, we're willing to, underwrite you expanding your operations, but we need you to build a separate platform for this. You don't know that stuff. And it makes this whole thing that much more murky. It's
100%.
why in my notes, I called it, is this the Illuminati? Right? Is there something happening that even Kickstarter can't tell us, right? That, this is all going to come out in the wash in 6 months. And we're going to go, oh, that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah. So I want to, hey, we're on Devil's Advocates. Occasionally we do this kind of play the Devil's Advocate kind of thing. And I'm going to do that for Kyle's point. By the way, that is a point that I alluded to earlier. And so I completely agree. We don't know what we don't know. There could be extra steps involved here that we just haven't seen yet. The Devil's Advocate version in me wants to say, here's the problem. It is just one campaign. And for that to happen, there's been a couple isolated incidents, but I know for the reasons that seem apparent that we're talking about this tonight, this is the campaign I can see being the best poster child for this. And having had that happen to just that one campaign after it was funded was a little odd. We haven't seen other mentions and no comment from Kickstarter. It does put me in this position where, just like Kyle said, there could be reasons why that's the case. But think about it this way. I know that Steve made a great comment earlier in the chat. That's one of the ones I definitely wanted to get back to. I'm going to kind of jump ahead and mention that now. Steve said that vendor on Kickstarter who had their funds revoked should have exercised due diligence and reviewed their payment platform's TOS before going into business with them. And by the way, I agree with Steve, but I also think there's some context there. And the context for me is, it's kind of like a copyright enforcement. If you don't enforce your copyright, you can essentially lose it. And that's from my understanding of it, right? You have to aggressively protect your copyright if people are trying to infringe upon it. This is to me similar in that if Kickstarter is by absence of ever enforcing this, and like K-pop just mentioned, and she's somebody who follows a ton of Kickstarters. I know Jay follows a lot of Kickstarters, more than I do, and I know that they're both aware of other campaigns like this. There's a lot of other campaigns like this on there. And so think about people who are planning a Kickstarter campaign, because we're talking about comic book shops and comic book shops carrying these comics. Well, in today's market, a lot of comic books that direct to LCS model is not very feasible for them, in the fact that Kickstarter is a very popular crowdfunding is a very popular way to get your brand new comic off the ground. It's perfect for, I don't know what my audience is. Let's put it out there and see what my audience is. Save on some printing costs, really tailor to what they want, learn more for issue 2 or other volumes coming down the road as far as, hey, here's what sold, here's what didn't sell, so you can hire and line up your artists that can align with those kinds of concepts. So businesses are planning their business around these campaigns. I'm a huge advocate for lack of censorship in the market. I'm a huge proponent of allowing a business to sell what they want to sell and not want to sell. But I'm also a huge proponent of transparency. And that to me is where this kind of kicks in. It's like if you're going to have this kind of push, some kind of statement or transparency to me it's not required, but it's going to go a long way towards me having faith in the platform. Kickstarter already kind of, for comic books, it has a fairly good reputation, I'll say. But I've backed a lot of products on Kickstarter that have had really sketchy goings on, and not just Kickstarter, other crowdfunding campaigns as well. So I think that's something that we really kind of have to address.
And that's the other thing I was going to say. And K-pop mentioned it, and I know this to be true because I, have a lot of friends who do, crowdfunding of other work. I have filmmaker friends who do crowdfunding. Like, because there are tons and tons of other projects out there that are in this realm, what other violation did the project that kicked this all off commit?
Right.
Like, we are assuming that this is a platform decision based on the content. But did they not enter their tax ID properly? Did they, did they fail to, was their bank in a country or a city or a place where Kickstarter won't send money? There are other violations you could commit that could cause this in addition to, right? Which is a very interesting other thing we don't know. Because of that, we get to sit here and speculate because of the content, and that's great. I don't want to speculate on other people's business practices, but it goes back to we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And the thing I wanted to ask, and this is gonna, I see you guys in the comments, and I'm gonna piss you off, and I don't really care. Do we actually need this in the comic industry? I mean, really? Spicy books and NSFW books are huge in the book market right now. Can the people from the comic market who want this stuff get their fix elsewhere while the comic industry figures out how to deal with it? And at the same time, you have cover artists and you have publishers like Zenescope who have made tremendous careers out of walking right up to that NSFW line and then not crossing it. Can we rein it back in until Kickstarter and Stripe, pardon my French, figure their shit out? Like, is this a needed segment right now? Or can we stick a pin in it like we did horror when the Comics Code Authority came out until we figure out how to do it without crossing whatever line gets crossed?
Man, you talk about irritating the chat, in your words. I'm gonna go ahead and immediately fire back on that one. And I think it's a very valid opinion. And I think that there are actually merits to it, because I think there are, like I mentioned earlier, there is a large segment of the comic collecting community that has an issue with this type of content. So in some ways you would potentially be, paying some lip service to them and honoring them. But I have to reject that concept roundly for me personally, because again, even somebody who does not really buy much of this content, occasionally I do, I really don't buy much of it. A lot of people are buying it, and they're putting money into art, and they're putting money into comic books. And from my own perspective, and everybody's perspective is different, I don't see a harm in anything happening. So when I see all money and art being celebrated in comic books, I'm going to be for it. And I have to be willing to honor that and put forward that type of content has its place and should be allowed to be put forward, unless I see some kind of evidence that it was doing harm to, younger readers or a segment of the population or something like that. Because then you get into this really sticky gray area of who's the judge, who gets to decide what content is or isn't. Is it NSFW because of the nudity, because of the adult themes, because of the violence, because of the political content? That's that real slippery slope. And I don't know if I want corporations deciding that for me. Now, again, they can decide we don't allow nudity. Great. I understand that. That's black and white. You are a private company. You can do that. We don't allow adult themed comics. Then you start to get into a very gray area that's a lot harder to nail down. And that's where I really get passionate about this for fans of that type of genre, because again, it's supporting artists, it's supporting writers, it's supporting small independent publishers. That's kind of where I think that the real heart of this issue. That's why this stuff needs to be discussed.
Well,
it's not for everybody.
What I'm getting at. I'm not saying don't make your art, not at all.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is when the Comics Code Authority dropped, it took a few months for companies to figure out how to do horror without violating the Comics Code Authority. Look at The Living Vampire, right? Look at the workarounds that Marvel and some of these companies came up with, right? And then there were other companies who said, screw the authority, we're just going to publish without it, and found their own way, right? And that's kind of what I'm saying is, does it have to come out right this second, or can we as an industry take a breath and say, you know what? For just a second, we're going to let Kickstarter and Stripe figure out what they're doing, and go to Indiegogo or go to K-pop, named a whole bunch of them earlier, that are other options right now to do that, right? Zoop and some of these other, I have friends who sell on HipComic, because HipComic they sell their Boundless comics on hipcomic.com because it doesn't have the same restrictions as eBay, right? Can we as an industry take a breath, figure out what we need to do to find a home, to build a home, to give this platform what it actually needs, and then shift? And that's kind of where I'm at with it, right? Like, and it's Steve said it, Kickstarter and Stripe may feel free to adopt their stance, but when their competitors don't care, those competitors are going to raise up because people are going to go there. And now we have an alternative. Like, I know a lot of people who don't feel like there's an alternative to Kickstarter because of some of the things that Indiegogo is associated with. But
yeah,
if there's a third option, or if that becomes the option for this, well, now you're giving Indiegogo a little bit of legitimacy, right, for this other thing. And now we're raising multiple platforms where people can actually spread their wings. And that's the thing that often gets my goat in comics, is that there's only one way, as opposed to take a breath and figure out what the actual path is for you, or find a path and carve it kind of thinking.
Yeah. And I do agree that there's always room for having the headspace to have a conversation. There's always room for creating alternate solutions. The problem in my eyes is that in a lot of ways Kickstarter has become, and I kind of hate to keep using the name, but it is the company that we're talking about in regards to this specific issue. They have become the name brand of indie self-published crowdfunding campaigns, right? I mean, for lack of a better way to phrase it, that's just, I know a lot of people who understand that comics are sold on places like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, etc., that just will not buy off those platforms, because to them it's just kind of, that's weird. If I can't order it from my LCS, I'm not going to buy it. So you've already shrunk your audience a little bit, right or wrong, that just happens. And then if you say, okay, well, Kickstarter as a platform, for example, could pick any of them, but it's the largest one. Well, they're not going to allow this kind of content. then you're shrinking your audience even more, putting them to another platform that doesn't have the same kind of reach. So it is kind of at that point, again, if that's how they want to have their campaigns run and those are the kind of rules they want to run, that's fine. But they need to clearly state that. They need to clearly state that this is what we're affirming to, even if it's in the terms of service. When they've allowed thousands of campaigns that are not agreeing with that, and they kind of continue to do so, if it was for other reasons, they need to clarify that. They need to say, like, just so you know, as a reminder, we don't allow this type of content on the platform, et cetera, et cetera. All those things are things that need to be kind of taken into consideration, because at the end of the day, you have creators that are going to be on hard times because this is the kind of content they create. Transitioning to something else is going to be difficult for them, or something that they morally object to because this is the kind of art they want to create. And it's not my place to decide what kind of art people should create.
But you and I have had this conversation before. Sometimes in business, the answer is mind your business. And Kickstarter and Stripe are making decisions, again, because it's just the one and maybe a very select few other campaigns that have been affected by this. It makes me feel like it's not the content that's the problem, right? That it is something else, right? That there is more to this story than we know. So keeping that in mind, but putting it aside, sometimes you can't clarify. You just have to act and move. And in a month, in 2 months, they'll come out and say, the reason why we took this action with certain things were this. Right? And in the meantime, the people who want to do that kind of work, who are scared, need to find another path. Or need to hold off. There have been wildly popular crowdfunding campaigns that haven't used Kickstarter, that have just used private websites.
Yeah.
I mean,
they often have had large followings elsewhere, though.
Sure, I understand that.
Yeah.
But it's this, if you're gonna make your art, you've got to make your art.
Yeah.
And I'm for anybody making whatever they want to make. Understand this. But I also come from a business background of pragmatism, where if I see a hurdle that I don't know how to get over, I'm going to find a way around it. And if Kickstarter and Stripe cracking down on not safe for work content is a hurdle I can't get over, then I need to find a way around it. And that's the thing I think is getting lost in some of this, right?
No, and I agree with that. I mean, there are. It's not like there's not other paths forward. There are other paths forward. But the question to me is, are they fair paths that other people would have the same opportunity for? And if they're not, I think we as a hobby deserve to ask ourselves, why are they not equitable paths for these types of content compared to, the other larger platforms? And there could be good reasons for that.
But comics isn't necessarily an equitable opportunity for everybody anyway.
It's not in some ways, but it shouldn't be because of the merit of the type of content in some people's eyes. Like that,
right,
that seems like an odd artificial lens to put it through.
But what I'm saying is, if Jeff Johns crowdfunds, he can crowdfund for a lot more money than I can.
Yeah, right. No, 100%.
It's not equitable. I'm not getting the same promotion as he is.
Yeah,
I'm just not. So when we talk about equity, when we talk about an equitable opportunity, equal opportunity here, Leonard, I already discussed that I wouldn't sell it to begin with. We talk about equal opportunity. Sometimes you have to make your own opportunity, right? If I want to crowdfund a book, I go to Kickstarter, I'm probably not going to be successful because I don't have a following at all. So I've got to go out and build my following first, and then try and find a platform for my audience. And if that is GoFundMe, then that's GoFundMe. If that's Indiegogo, then that's Indiegogo. If that's my own private website, that's my own private website. But equity or equitable opportunity isn't something that's offered just because of a platform.
So the point I'm trying to make there is kind of like along with what I said earlier. You're going to shrink your audience if you're talking about going to alternate platforms, because there is an element to platforms like that where other campaigns will be surfaced to a larger audience that have a chance to discover that particular campaign. And if you don't,
if I've curated my audience, they're going to come with me.
If you have, yeah, that's true. Again, it's not that it's impossible to find another road forward. It's just not always as possible to find the same type of road forward that will offer the same opportunities. And to me, it's just silly to tell a type of content like you don't have a right to be on our platform. Now that's me if I own the platform. I don't own Kickstarter. I don't own Stripe. I don't own any of these other platforms, and that's up to them to allow or not. But I think as a community, we're free to sit back and make judgment about whether or not that's something that we want to support. And some of us will, and some of us won't want to support that. And that's just what it comes down to. It's still an okay question to ask.
Right. I mean, on some level, I equate this to the reason you don't see Vivid pictures released to movie theaters in your local mall. Right. Those people, those companies, those creators had to target their audience and move their audience to another place to take in their content. And we're talking about a way forward right now. We're talking about what can be done in the moment. Well, Kickstarter and Stripe haven't told us why this has happened.
True.
So until they do, if they ever do, people have to find a way forward. And maybe it's you put your naughty bits inside the book and not on the cover. Maybe that's your solution, right? Or maybe it's you launch on Kickstarter and you also launch somewhere else at the same time. And that way, if Kickstarter does kick you off, you still got this other thing where you can pivot. There's a number of opportunities here forward, and that's kind of where we're at. Like, unfortunately, we can't we're talking about content because that's the topic of the show, but I'm talking about making any kind of content, not just not safe for work content.
Yeah. But before we continue, though, I got to say one thing, because your analogy is perfect. Mm-hmm. The reason you don't find Vivid movies at your local movie theater is because they're not part of the MPAA.
Right.
And they will only play movies that are part of the MPAA. Correct. And the MPAA will not allow adult content to join. So you're right. It is actually very similar to that.
Right. And I mean, that's what I'm saying is those people had to find a way forward.
Yeah.
When I wanted to stay in comic books after my store closed, I had to find a way forward. Kickstarter closing off its doors to not safe for work content is the same as a business closing its doors to its customers. So we have to talk about a pivot. And again, I'm with everybody else when they say Kickstarter. That's funny, Leonard. It's very funny, especially if you've been to my local theater.
I worked for Regal Cinemas for 6 years. Let me tell you, that you deal with plenty of that stuff, whether it's that kind of content is involved or not. I have some stories to talk about. Devil's Advocates After Hours.
It's true, but no, it's you have to find a pivot. And
yeah, the reality is you do.
I think Kickstarter allowing some not safe for work things and not others is a problem for them that they need to address as a platform. You either allow everybody or you allow none. I'm good with that. But if you're going to allow none, then those none need to figure out where to go.
Just wait till you see the Wolverine popcorn bucket.
Oh man, I got a meme to send you.
I probably have seen it. I've seen some fire ones.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I mean, again, as passionate as I am about it, by the way, to me, it is weird that I am passionate about this, because I seriously do not support financially many of these types of campaigns. In fact, I can count on 3 fingers, I think, the number of times that I've supported one of these campaigns. And that was just happenstance, because they happen to offer that kind of content. But at the same time, I do have a passion for art having its place, whether I support it or not. I think it's the only way you can love art. For me, at least, it's the only way I can love art, is if I allow all art in there, whether I like it or not, whether I think it's offensive or not. And there is stuff I think is offensive, for sure. But when it comes to a path forward, which I do want to, speak to that. I think that's very important as we're trying to wrap up the show. Yes, there absolutely needs to be other paths forward. I'm going to continue this theater and adult film industry kind of analogy a little bit further, because one thing that happened because of that, it's really an interesting scenario. You think about an alternate history where, let's say, the adult film industry was allowed into the MPAA or some kind of organization like that, is it probably would have meant better conditions for some of the people in that industry. And so one of the things I would hate to see have happen because of something like this is to have things go even more underground. I think that's kind of part of my hesitation in general. What I do know is there's a lot of companies out there that do publish, NSFW type content and types of these kind of comics. It'd be cool to see some of those companies and smaller publishers maybe partner up and offer some of their distribution channels with some of these companies. I understand that they may not be willing to do that for various reasons, like it could cut into their slice of the pie, and there's a lot of things that go around that. But there's a couple of them that do like print their own comic books, and they do things along those lines. So I could see there maybe being some relationships to be had there, where there could kind of be a coalition built. I think it's definitely worth thinking outside the box if you are in this industry. Like if you happen to be watching this stream and you are in that type of segment of the industry and you're looking for ways forward, I think networking is going to be a huge thing for you, because we talk about it all the time on the show. A high tide tends to raise all ships. And so if you're working together to kind of get your content out there, find ways to advertise it on social media that are acceptable to those social media platforms, it's probably going to be beneficial to you.
Yeah, I mean, there are, and that's the other thing, right? There are companies that exist who distribute this kind of thing.
Yeah. Steve, it was rated NC-17. That's a real rating in the MPAA rating system. So yeah, there's been multiple movies like that. In fact, you've probably seen one of them. It was called Saving Private Ryan, but they were forced to give it an R rating because of the director.
Yeah. There are there are distributors, there are places these creators can go where there are opportunity. Right. And I've worked with many of those distributors. They're great distributors that really do respect the work. And again, I've said it a bunch of times on the show. If you want to make art, make your art. I'm for you making whatever kind of art, even if it isn't my style, right? Even if it's not something I would support with my dollars. If you feel compelled to make the art, make it. Because the only way we get My Little Pony is if there's somebody out there drawing something that is very not My Little Pony. If the worst among us can't say what they need to say, then the best among us also can't.
Yeah.
And that's not to say NSFW content is the worst or the best. It needs to exist so that everything else can exist.
Exactly.
But part of that is finding your way to get your product out, right? There are bands that I support that cannot have their music on Spotify or Apple Music or really even the darkest corners of the internet. Because that's just the kind of music they make, right? I don't know if you ever heard of chainsaw metal, but chainsaw metal isn't going to play on Apple Music. Right? It's just not. The same way that, you know, you're not going to get adult film in theaters, or you're not going to get NSFW comics from Marvel. Right? It's, you have to find your way and find your artists, find your avenues to get out there. And when one door closes, another door opens. And if it doesn't, build the door and open it. Right? Like, as much as that might suck and it might be really hard, if 50 or 100 of these creators, led by some really big names in our industry who do this kind of work, got together and said, you know what? Screw Kickstarter. We're launching a platform.
Yeah.
Then everybody wins. But we get so myopic. We get so tunnel visioned on one place that we can't see our way through the hurdles that one place puts in front of us. And so I think it's important, you know, that, again, I want everybody to make what they want to make. I want everybody to be happy. I want everybody to be able to buy what they want to buy. Just because I'm not going to sell it to you doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to go buy it. Right? And just because Kickstarter's not going to sell it to you doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to go buy it. So I really like Bronze's idea of band together, man. Get 5 or 10 people together and launch a distribution channel. Get 5 or 10 people together and launch a website that's just for this. Launch your own crowdfunder. It might be hard right now. It might be hard at first. But at the end of the day, you're going to wind up coming out ahead because you've got nobody who can tell you what to do. You've got nobody who can judge your product.
I mean, people that look at that model, I just want to point out that it's a more difficult road for sure, like 100%. But if you look at the history of comic books, it has often rewarded those that have decided to take that path, and I think that's something that's kind of unique to comics in some ways. I'm
a huge collector of the underground guys.
Yeah,
I've got Cherry Pop-Tart and funny animals and all of that kind of stuff that paved the way for this sort of thing because it's important historically. And I enjoy that idea of the underground art, the underground thing. Those guys led to this. Today's creators could lead to the next thing. If instead of getting pushed down by Kickstarter, or instead of getting upset about what's happening, they just said, okay, we're going to do what those guys did before us and make our own.
Yeah.
And then in a month's time, in 6 months' time, in a year's time, when whatever caused this to happen on Kickstarter becomes public or gets known, then we can all look back and go, okay, either Kickstarter is a soon-to-be dead platform for being, overly censoring or being a problem, or, oh, that makes sense as to why that happened for those specific instances. Right? We're in the middle of it, so we don't see all the sides, and we need to pull back and try and look at it from 50,000 feet.
Yeah.
And it just sucks that out there's an artist somewhere who thought their book was made. Out there's a writer somewhere that thought their book was made. And the plug got pulled out from under them. And that sucks. And I hope they find a way through. But at least right now, it's going to be really tough. And that's the real rub here. And I hate to use that pun because I know Bronze was saving it for something.
Wait, do you have any idea how hard I've struggled to be mature on this show? Like when one door closes, another opens. Like I had jokes ready.
I know. And again, that's what I'm saying, K-pop, is there's so much we don't know, but we're talking about it as if
Absolutely.
the content is the only thing. And it's not. So if if the content is the only thing and you're worried about Kickstarter, go out and do the work. I promise you people will follow you. It might not be as many and you might have to work a lot harder, but people will follow you because there are people who want it.
And I 100% agree that we should not jump to conclusions, but I do think the fact that pretty much universally everybody jumped to the same conclusion is kind of indicative of the fact that there is kind of a larger, whether or not you think there's a war on adult comics. It's obviously a very hyperbolic comment, but there is kind of an ongoing issue with this type of content in comic books. And I do think that, going forward, there's a really high likelihood that we might have, a part 3 to this someday as a new chapter kind of comes up in this particular arena. Also, kind of a segue to mention the fact that, Kyle and I have talked about revisiting some older topics that we've talked about before in the past. I believe Jay dropped the link earlier in chat for suggesting topics for us to talk about on Devil's Advocates. We really appreciate you doing that. That includes if you want us to revisit any topics that we've talked about before. There's several that have had newer developments or newer stories come out that have kind of involved evolutions in what we would have talked about the first time around. The other thing we'd love to do, maybe at some point, is have people on to talk about some of those topics that are maybe more experts in those fields, that kind of thing, or they have a different perspective to offer. So also stuff to think about as you're thinking about suggestions for topics.
So
there we go.
There's the link again over in the chat. I will not be here next week. I don't know if Bronze is doing a show on his own.
Yeah, we're gonna figure something out. I might have a guest on. I'm definitely gonna figure something out. Bear with us, folks, as we kind of get geared up for that. But I'm gonna be making some phone calls tomorrow when I talk to some people about potentially coming on and talk about some different stuff than we usually talk about, maybe.
But if you're interested in where I'll be, follow the EXP social media. There may or may not be photos of me in various states of pain as I go to Monday Night Raw. So, we'll talk about that later. But
talk about not safe for life,
right? Maybe that's the next episode we do. Bronze is Kyle teaches Bronze about wrestling.
You know what? I'm down for that. Absolutely. And you might have, some people. There might be a fun guest or something we could have on that one too to help educate me.
Oh, absolutely. But Bronze, tell everybody what's happening over on the Bronze Age Nerd channel. What should people be looking for? Jay, we're not getting the tables, but I might be a turtle. Better than ringside, Steve. Better than ringside.
There's no question that you're a turtle. I mean, I don't know. I've only seen like a few episodes of Entourage, and I know that. Sorry, bad joke.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to make a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles joke.
No, I mean, that too. I had lots of ways I could go with it, but I just decided to go for the worst possible one because mostly I think the backwards hat helped, which I also wear my hat backwards, so I'm not making fun of you. But
I'll be honest, I'm only doing it because my head is so sunburned. We wouldn't have been able to get through the show without people going, "What happened to Kyle?"
Teenage Mutant Ninja Lobsters. So one thing that just happened, if you're watching on my channel, maybe you're watching here on the EXP, is I do a show with my co-host every 2 weeks on my channel for Best Coast Comics, Big B McFly, the comic book guy. And we'll be doing that show on Monday on after whatever happens here next week on the EXP. Stay tuned for both of those things. In addition to that, we just did a claim sale here, aired here on the EXP and on my channel. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of success with that. A lot of viewers from both channels were tuning in. So we're probably going to end up doing some more content along those lines. If that's something you're interested in seeing, definitely give those suggestions to us for kind of things that you'd want to see. We have a lot of ways to make that show better production value. We're probably going to be in the same location for the next one, which will be really cool, with a wall of books and all that kind of fun stuff. So should be a lot of fun. And then in the meantime, stay tuned to my channel. You're probably going to see a CGC unboxing go up on my channel by the end of the week with a cool kind of pressing experiment that happened. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and here on the Experience, we've got all kinds of stuff happening. But mainly just our regular schedule of shows this week and hopefully dropping some new content end of this week, early next. So if you haven't hit subscribe, do. And if you have already hit subscribe, don't click it again because then you unsubscribe and resubscribe, and it doesn't really help.
No.
So we
At least
will
click it
see
twice if you're gonna
everybody.
do it.
We will see everybody tomorrow for Minute to Skim It with Jay and I. And next week on this show, Bronze will be here. And I will probably be somewhere getting medical attention. So we will see you next time.
Join the party. Head over to our Linktree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.